Hi, my name is Emmy Peck. Welcome to the show. One of the more unusual special exhibits shown at the DIA recently was named Edible Monument. It featured peculiar occasions in the 1500s through the 1700s, when in Europe, the wealth and power of local rulers and governments was demonstrated in an extraordinary manner. Parades covered with food, street monuments made of meats, breads, and sweets, and banquet table centerpieces of exquisite sculptures made of sugar paste. One of the objects most admired in the exhibit was a large, magnificent palace and garden with mythological characters, all made of sugar paste. The show today is a demonstration of the ancient technique used to form these wonderful objects by Ivan Day, expert in this skill among other historical culinary feats. He's introduced by Alan Darr, DIA's senior curator and the Walter B. Ford Family Curator of Sculpture and Decorative Arts.
We are delighted to have with us today Ivan Day. He's a very talented professional chef and a confectioner. He's recreations of meals and table settings using actual historical recipes and culinary manuals, as well as period-appropriate kitchen equipment, no less. He's had different exhibitions in Canada, in England, and at the Metropolitan Museum, at the Getty, and now in Detroit. His monumental table centerpiece, the Palace of Circe, that you see in the exhibition, has been wowing audiences who have seen the show. His fascination with the history of food began at the ripe old age of 13 when he bought his first cookery book, an 18th century book, and then he learned how to cook using that book. And he's gone on to create an incredible library of French, English, and Italian antiquarian recipe books, and actually utensils, some of which he may be using today, and molds and so forth. As a response to requests from friends, food writers, and fellow culinary enthusiasts interested in the art of preparing historic food, Ivan has offered unique, practical courses on period cookery based on the historic kitchen in his own home, a 16th century manor house in Cumbria in the Lake District of England, and it's been hailed by the Food and Travel magazine as, quote, the most unique cookery school in Europe. He's also been a contributor, historical consultant, and presenter on an impressive list of British radio and television programming, including the BBC's recent 20-part called the Royal Upstairs Downstairs, which explored the food of Queen Victoria. Over the past 30 years, Ivan has also authored a number of books, including Eat, Drink, and Be Merry in 2000, Cooking in Europe, 1650 to 1850, 2009, and most recently, a publication on the history of ice cream in Britain. He's currently working on a book on the history of cheese and cheese making. He's lectured throughout Europe and the United States, and when he spoke here in 2010, it was on European dining in the 18th century, followed by a demonstration of making was it a royal punch, a special punch with a brandy that everyone could partake in. Many wonderful memories of that. Today we're delighted to have Ivan with us this morning, who's going to be demonstrating how to create sugar sculpture. So without further ado, let's welcome Ivan Day back to Detroit.
I suffer from something called culinary amnesia. I've forgotten all about that punch and I still can't recall it, so it must have been really strong. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a two-part presentation. The first one will be a fairly straightforward slideshow, putting all of this into historical and cultural context. It will be very brief. And the second part of it is actually going to be a practical demonstration. The screen will go up, the projector will be switched off, and I will change places. And that's the bit I'm a little bit nervous about, because I know in the audience I've got a lot of very distinguished art historians, and I keep worrying about a dream I had last night, that this was like one of those competitive television programs. Sugar sculpture, you know, the great Michigan sugar bacon or whatever. And in the back row, I dreamt that there were some judges, you know, who were going to hold their scorecard. The judges were, in fact, Gian Bologna, or the ghost of Ciro Ferri, Pietro Tacca, and Jacopo Sansovino, you see, the ghosts of sitting in the back, and I was pretty worried about what their score would be. I'm doing this bit by the seat of my pants because I've condensed what is like a 3-day job into an hour and 10 minutes. And in order to do that, I've had to do a lot of stuff on the other side of the Atlantic and then struggle through immigration with lots of white powders and things. And, you know, it was like Breaking Bad when I get to the and when the officer opens my case and says, "What's this, sir?" I think, Christ, I just have to call Saul, I think, to get me out of this one. Some of you probably didn't watch that television series. Anyway, let's make a start. So, right, I've called this little presentation to make images in sugar. I get the title from this early 15th century manuscript, which is the earliest text in English that I've found that refers to this particular arcane and eccentric branch of the decorative arts. And if you check out up there, it says to make images in sugar. And if you will make any images, so on, it tells you how to do this. And the technique that it describes is making a syrup, a solution of sugar, concentrated sugar syrup, boiling it up, and then pouring it into a mold that is either made of wood or plaster, and letting the sugar crystallize. It takes a while to do it, and then the mold is taken apart. It's a multi-part mold normally. Now, there are other descriptions as well as this English one, particularly in Italian Renaissance texts, in what became known in Europe as a literature called books of secrets. You know, these were. But this technique originated not in Europe, but probably in India. Certainly, it was brought into the Mediterranean during the sort of Islamic migration. So, if the word sugar is actually a Sanskrit word, sukar, it's the same in Arabic. So, when the Venetian sugar merchants in Constantinopolis, in Byzantium, asked these traders what this stuff was, they would just call it sukar. So the name stuck. It's a vapor trail, linguistically, going back to where it came from, which was the Indian subcontinent. So this technique of boiling up sugar so it turns back to sugar, boiling a syrup, and then putting it into a mold, goes way back. And that's the earliest English reference that I've found. And quite close to that in time is this remarkable survival, which is a terracotta mould. It's in the collection of the Museum of London. And it's one half of a 2-part mould, and the other half is missing. There are some continental moulds like this too. And it's made of unglazed terracotta because what you do is you soak the mould in water. It absorbs the water, you let it dry out. There's just enough water within the clay body to act as a releasing agent. So you pour in your sugar syrup, you wait a while, and then you open it up, and lo and behold, St. Catherine of Siena just appears like that, okay? And these things in this period were very high status things, and there was a tradition of having these allegorical figures often in between the courses of the meal. In France, they were known as entremets, which means in between the course. In England, they were called either subtleties or warners, which were slightly different. You know, a warner was one that warned you that there was another course on the way and there'd be some sort of, you know, allegorical. I'm going to talk about that more this afternoon. It's the technique I want to discuss today. Now, I don't know if any of you saw this wonderful exhibition in Florence in 2015 at the Palazzo Pitti. One of the curators was a close colleague and friend of mine, Giovanni Giusti. And what they did was they got a foundry in Chianti-shire to actually use this casting technique. And what the very skilled workers did in the foundry was they actually remodeled some early miniature bronzes. They copied, for instance, Gian Bologna's, some of his figures. They made them up in terracotta, and then they made the usual plaster molds that you would if you were using the lost wax process. And instead of casting in bronze, they tried this method. It hit a lot of really difficult problems, and they found that they could only really succeed when the actual artwork was fairly in two dimensionals. Anything that was a little bit like a, Gian Lorenzo Bernini with sort of all sorts of bits flying all over the place, it became very difficult to do it. So this technique was used, but there's very little written about it being used, for instance, in Renaissance Italy. Of course, Italy gets sugar from the Islamic world, and it's possible that the city of Venice, and probably Genoa to a lesser extent, were the kind of points of contact where this culture transferred from the Islamic world into the European sphere. But there is another technique, which is the one I'm going to demonstrate. So there are two methods. That's the sugar casting method. There is also the modeling method, which uses sugar, but using a completely different technique. This also emerged out of probably the Islamic world and its interest in medicine in the ancient Roman and Greek worlds, because Dioscorides, the 1st century AD physician, in his Materia Medica, describes a plant that he calls Tragacanthus, goat's thorn, it means literally. And he tells us that this Tragacanthus exudes an exudate, a kind of gum, which you can see here in this very nice little wood engraving from the 17th century. It exudes this sort of strange lacy little ribbons of gum. And in fact, that's quite accurate, because when it's harvested from the plant, it looks just a bit like that. Can you see? And here is the plant. Actually, I've just put a pointer on there so you can actually see how it comes out. Now, ancient Greek and Roman doctors used this. They ground it into a powder, and they mixed it with ground up drugs, ground up herbs and spices that we use in medicine, and made pills. So it was the binding agent that they held the medicine together with. And that's discussed in the 1st century AD. And what happened, I think, probably in the 9th century, maybe, in the Islamic world, they started using it to bind sugar together. Because sugar was often an ingredient in medicine. And somebody discovered that this actually made a pliable modelling material. It's a bit like Play-Doh. It's much finer. It's more like porcelain, actually. And of course, in Europe, its use as an artistic medium predates that of porcelain itself. Now, if you look at this, this is actually the 16th century Seljuk or Ottoman illustration, and it shows the procession to commemorate the circumcision of a son of the Sultan. And you can see the little boy is going to be very amused by sugar giraffes and other creatures. There's an elephant there. So, despite this sort of forbidding imagery, in this particular world, they were very relaxed about it. And it would seem from some of the records that the artists who made these in the Ottoman world were known as Suka Nakasali. My Turkish is absolutely atrocious, so if anyone does speak it correctly. But it would seem that they weren't Muslims. They were often Jewish people, who had knew about this craft, because maybe it was forbidden, I don't know, to do this. But certainly they were processed. Now, this technique of modelling them from this sort of plasticine-like model, we start in Italy in the 16th century. We start getting the recipes creeping into these books of secrets. Now, this is a very famous book written in the middle of the 16th century by this Girolamo Rosselli, and you can see it was translated in English in the later 16th century, and here is the actual recipe that I'm going to demonstrate for you today, in black letter there, you can see it on the right. And it's basically a mixture of this gum, which you grind into a powder. It's very boring, it just looks like a white powder. You mix it with ground up sugar, another white powder, and you end up with this pliable modelling material. In some of the literature, we see the beginning of the culture, because this is really important. To make a paste of sugar, whereof a man may make all manner of fruits and other fine things with their form, as platters, dishes, glasses, cups, and such like things, wherewith you may furnish a table. And when you have done, eat them up, a pleasant thing for them that sit at the table. So this was a kind of Renaissance ploy to avoid the washing up, you know. And you have to remember that, because there is a jocular, humorous element to this. This is party time, you know, and eating the cups and the plates. Now, I'm going to talk about this afternoon, but in Pesaro in 1475, there was a remarkable wedding for the Este family. And in one of the 16 courses in the meal, which took all day and all night to serve, the people were served off sugar platters, which were all decorated as if it were Mionica. So imagine Italian Renaissance Mionica, made of sugar and all painted, so that they could all just munch their way through them when they're finished eating. So there's a joke in here. And of course they made sugar playing cards, most of the European literature, so you can eat your opponents. And there's even a record of Francis I being given a sugar chess set with a sugar board as a gift from Cardinal Wolsey. You know the famous Holbein painting of the ambassadors? Well, apparently they went back to France with this chess set that was made of sugar. As we sort of move on into the 17th and into the 18th century, particularly in France and Italy, you get an extraordinary level of craftsmanship. This is a very famous engraving, which is actually the one from the Encyclopédie, but it's based on the very famous book by Joseph Gillier, which you can see in the Edible Monument exhibition, showing a couple of young boys actually making flowers. It's a wonderful study, I think, in concentration. And this is the sort of thing they did. This is some of mine for an exhibition at Waddesdon a few years ago. Using a slab of marble or a sheet of glass and a wooden roller. This actually belonged to a very, very distinguished early 19th century confectioner called Prati, who was a pupil of Antonin Carême. And these are the sort of rollers that they used. So I'm going to use one or two items of equipment, but this I'm not going to do for you because it takes too long and it's a bit boring to watch. The idea is that you make a plate out of sugar, which is really easy to do, because you take a silver charger or a great Maiolica dish or whatever you want, you roll a sheet out of this material, which I'll show you in a moment, and you just press it down into the plate, and you end up with one which you can eat after you've eaten your petit four. There is a plate. Now, that can be painted, and as I said, there are some very good records of this happening, at least in the 15th century. So let's start off with that. Now, of course, we know that there were cups, tazze, all sorts of things that were made using this technique from those records. There are lots more than the ones I've shown you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to construct a tazza, a sort of Renaissance, inverted commas, style tazza, I guess. This is where I'm worried about my four invisible judges at the back. I haven't got any Renaissance bubble wrap or cling wrap with me. But they did have it. They took silk and they rubbed like fat into it, and that made an impervious material. Now what I've got here is some of the material that we're going to use. In France this became known as pastillage. In England it was called gum paste or sugar plate, and as you can see it's a kind of very pliable. That gum really makes it a bit like chewing gum. You can't blow bubbles with it if you chew it, but it's very much like that. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just make a little element here. You have to keep the air out of it, so I'm going to resort to modern technology there. I've got here the sort of mould that actually a silversmith or somebody working in ceramics might use, except if it was this would probably be made of plaster, and it's known as a sprig. But this is one that is probably late 18th, early 19th century. And what it does is this. I've got here some starch dust, and I'm going to powder this mould with it. And you see, I'm going to knock the excess out, and then I'm going to fold it so that I get a perfectly smooth side. and then I'm going to push it into that mould. And this is where I'm going to have to sit down. And then, once you've pushed it in, and it's popped out, I need to dust the top as well. If I put dust on the top, it means that if I push it, my hand doesn't pull it out, you see. And then I'm going to put a lot of pressure on it like that. And then I'm going to get, this is a gilding knife, it's what you cut gold leaf with, but it's great because it's got a perfect straight edge on it. I can then, by shaving off the excess, now, if you were doing this with porcelain using a plaster sprig, it's a very, very similar technique. But the use of this material in Europe predates porcelain by many hundreds of years. And I mean, we've got some very distinguished historians of ceramics here in the room. And I know there's quite a lot of interest in this skill transfer that probably happened in the 18th century. I know my friend Maureen Cassidy-Geigel has been going through the Dresden archives, and she's pretty convinced that some of the confectioners who worked at the court of Augustus the Strong, actually ended up working as model makers in the actual workshops. So the next stage is this. I'm just going to flip it over, and there's a hole on this side of the mould, and what I then need is something like a little wooden stick, and I can make a hole. They do this more carefully than I'm going to do, because you'd have to probably use something to give you a good right angle, and there's always something in the workshop that enables you to do that, so that you can get a good right angle, okay? And then give it a twist round, and that means you've got a hole through the middle. And then it's a case of gently tapping it, and you've got, that's very, very soft, okay? But of course, I've got another one here I made yesterday. So if I join the two together, I get a rather nice Gudrun Boss, right? Now, I have another mould here which makes a base, beautifully carved. The skill is not mine, it's these guys who died a long time ago. We don't even know their names. So with that one, I can make a nice base like this. Can you see that? Okay, we can pass this round in a minute. So using that, let's see what we can do first of all. And we're bearing in mind this original role of this as a party joke. Something that you can actually eat. You can even drink out of this. You could drink out of cups and glasses made of it. And they were drinking tazze as well in the Renaissance, made in Venice. And my whole inspiration for this really is the form of some of those Venetian tazze. So over here, I have another interesting ingredient. This is a solution which is an adhesive. And it is made from the bladder of a sturgeon fish, the swim bladder. They had such an amazing understanding of what was useful in the natural world. Who discovers that the swim bladder of a sturgeon makes one of the best glues there is in the history of arts and crafts, and it was used in this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this. I've just made a disc of sugar here, and I'm going to paint some sturgeon's bladder on the bottom of it, okay, and be quite generous with it. And some of that will dissolve the sugar a little bit and enable me to join this together. Now I've got to get it pretty well centered. I'll do it by eye. So that gives me now a base, okay, with that in the middle. That should hold together. Let me just double check. It's a little bit drifting over that side. So I'll put it there. Now, I've already made some components. I'm going to make a few more to show you how it was done. But so let's sort of look at one style of sugar sort of stand that you can put sweeties and things on for a banquet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as a guide to help me hold the whole thing together. And again, in England, I made a few other little things. Some little sugar spheres, which I've gilded, but I put a hole through them, okay? So I'm just going to get a little bit of my material out of my bag. I don't need much. I can, here we go, just a tiny bit like that. And what I'm going to do is, with a little bit of the isinglass, I'm just going to anoint the bottom of that. And I'm going to make a little disc, which I'm going to push down the stick and just pull it down like that. And just, whoops, that'll be fine. I'll just sit it on there. It's best to use a modelling tool. Okay. That. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide down the stick one of my gilded balls, which is part of the boss structure. Let me just find the hole. Okay, and I'm just going to push that on there and just make sure that it's neat and tidy. And that stabilises that. I'm going to do that again with another little piece of the sugar paste with some sturgeon's bladder. The smaller the better, really. In fact, I'm just going to push it on like that and let it sort itself out. Then, by sticking two of those together, okay, that's the one I just made, and this is one I made before, I can make this structure, which I can then slide down my armature. Often these structures had a wooden or a cardboard substructure inside them, okay? So we're getting there, and then I'm going to repeat that. Now, you can understand that making one of these from scratch would take a whole day, so that's why I've made these other pieces in preparation. So I'm sorry, this is a little bit slow, and okay, so another little gilded ball. Now, does that look fairly straight and upright? It does, right? Okay. And you know, there'll be repairs and little finishing things to do later on. Okie dokes. And then finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another one of these, and this time I'm going to put my glue on the back here. I'm going to put some on the little wooden armature, and then I'm going to push that onto there, if I can find the hole. Where are you? Doesn't want to go. Zip. Doesn't want to do it for some reason. Hang on. Just twist it down. I might have to use the other one that I made, which would be better actually. This is more pliable. So, okay, so this is the fresh one that I made, but it will be not a problem. Okay, so that goes on there like that. And then I can just push that right down. That's it. Just make sure that's straight. Now I have brought a modern thing here, which is a little, you know, spirit level. Okay. But there's one other little element that I need to do, which I'm going to mount that on top. This just needs to come up a bit because I'm just wondering whether I can actually get this to. I know what's happened. I blocked it up a little bit, so it would be better to use this one, I think. Right, let's start again. Things do go wrong, as you know, in studios with artists all the time. So let's try that again and see if that is going to work. Yeah, perfect, okay. And that's fairly stable. So finally, before we finish it, I'll put a little bit more of the isinglass glue on here. This just gives me the height that I need. And I can then use my plate to actually finish it off. Okay. But there's more to it than that. So what we'll do is we'll carefully paint. a bit more of the glue on there. And then normally one would center this onto here by turning this upside down. But I'm going to guess it. See what I mean? I'd put this on the table and then center it on there. But everything's a bit too fragile, so I'm going to guess. And I'm going to put that like that. No, it's not quite there, is it? Okay. Right. Okay, so that's how it would be finished. But, we can do something a bit more advanced than this. If we look, there's some wonderful designs which date, from the early 16th century for table salts and other things which look very close to the kind of, these triumphi. And what I'm going to do is, I've got here a wonderful mould which I'm going to pass round so that you can have a close look at it, which is of two halves of a dolphin. And you'll notice that there are some little lines carved in, which is actually to put a wire through them to stabilise them and hold them together. So, Meredith, if I give that to you, would you like to pass that around? I'm not going to bother turning one out because it's exactly the same technique. Yeah, just pass it around. And if it doesn't come back, I'll know that Sansovino on the back has stolen it. Okay. So basically, what happens with that is you press out two halves, and using the same fish glue, as you stick them together, and you end up with something like that, three-dimensional dolphin. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this a little bit further up the artistic scale, and using a little bit more of the paste and a little bit more of the glue, I'm going to, at 6 o'clock here, just stick one of these dolphins onto the stand. You probably can't see what I'm doing because I have to do it from this side, and I'm going to see if I can get him to sit on there and stabilise. I need a little bit more. I'll put a big piece on. I'm going to have to do this rather crudely in order to get it to work. So, okay, now he's holding together nicely, but it looks like he's sitting on a great big piece of discarded chewing gum at the moment. Okay, and if I do the same with the other three, I might have to grab some of this actually. Let's get a big one there. Okay. And I just look down, I can sort of roughly figure out where he needs to go. And I'll push this down. This enables me to stick another one down. And as I say, I've made a few of these. So we're going to end up with something just a little bit more sophisticated than the simple tatsa there. Okay. Looking good already. And then, as I say, here's another one I made before. And we will... It's quite good fun, isn't it? Yes. And of course, these guys, they did things to the most amazing level of skill. I mean, that wonderful engraving of the Triunfo of Daphne and Apollo, or Mira. That's why I'm worried about those scorecards at the back. So really, this is just like a kind of evocation rather than a recreation, really, which is a phrase I stole off my friend Meredith, actually. So, okay, let's just put him on. And once they touch the central support, they stabilise the whole thing, you see. And you get some, there are some where they had 3 dolphins rather than 4. And there are some wonderful pieces of porcelain, actually, that are made using this very, very motif. So it's great to see how a minor art that was really a novelty for the table does influence some very important form in the decorative arts. Okay, so this is my first little adventure for you. But you can see how they're using techniques which are identical to metalwork and ceramics to create something, and they made them so well. Often they would paint them, they would gild them, or they'd silver leaf them, and what you ended up with was something actually which was practically impossible to tell what material it was made out of. So I mean, it's a bit rough and crude, and this may not sit on quite square, but it's a bit wobbly, but that's as far as I can take it. So, you know, you need a little bit more studio time to get that finished and tidied up. So let's just put that aside and go on with something else. And I'll go back to something a little bit more sophisticated. What I've got here is a remarkable mould. It's a card. This is called a card mould, and I'll pass it round, but it wants to come back to me quickly because I'm going to use it. And if you look, it's got motifs on the back. And this is to make a sugar figure of Neptune. It's probably 18th century, there is a sort of boil on Neptuno's bottom, actually. So right on his left cheek, there's a hole, which is probably a woodworm. So he's got a bit of a blemish on his bottom. Okay. But if we could, I'm going to make use of that. So I want it back fairly quickly. Okay. So I mentioned this technique of actually making figures and animals, and what we have here, get it round quickly, you know, quick, folks, because I need it back here. Okay. When the last person gets it, so turn it over, have a look at both sides, but you'll get a chance to see what it makes. So for this, I need a little bit more material. So I'm going to, I think I'm going to pass some of this around as well, so that you can get a feel for it. It might feel slightly sticky, and it will probably be very dry by the time it gets to the last person, because it does dry out. And that's where one of the technical problems is with it. Unlike porcelain or terracotta, it dries out much more quickly, and that's why it was very challenging for people to freely model with it, because it dries quickly on the outside, but the inside remains soft, which causes a crusting. It's a bit like eating truffles or ortolan. You have to have something over your head to stop the air getting in, you know. But it's possible to do it, but you use it basically using an armature. You apply it with a modelling tool to an armature as if you were modelling in terracotta. So you start off rough, and then you can smooth out the edges and everything with a modelling tool. I've modelled freely in it, but it's a very slow process, and it's like watching paint dry. So we're going to go for something a bit more interesting. So is that mould of Neptune making its rounds? Good. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how fine these people were able to work, because the real skill is in the wood carving. And we're in the realm not really of Jacopo Sansovino and the young Bologna and these great sculptors who did flirt with this method. We're in the realm of confectioners who were food professionals, and some of them were not as artistically skilled as sculptors who worked in more orthodox materials. So using these molds was great for them. But what is remarkable, that nearly all, I've got a collection of about 600 of these things, which means many thousands of motifs. And I've got everything. I can do all of the classical orders of architecture, from original 17th, 18th and early 19th century molds, and so many more other things. And the quality of the carving varies, but it's either good or unbelievable. So the skill of the carving is as good sometimes as you might get on 17th century Louis XIV's furniture. It's that good, but it's in miniature. And it's the same technique that the stucco artists used for making their wooden molds, for doing friezes and wonderful plasterwork. So what I want to show you here is, for instance, is how you made limbs, because if you're looking at mold, you'll see But you've got the front and back. That's great. You've got the front and back, but you've also got arms and legs. And of course, when he comes out, you think, God, he's going to look like one of those rather wooden Staffordshire, rather two-dimensional things, There's going to be nothing that's really flowing, but that's extraordinary because, for instance, let me show you this. I daren't pass this round, but this is making an arm. Just look at what comes out of the mould. But once you get it out, although on here the fingers are flat, with a modelling tool, which I've done already, you can flex them. You see? I don't know if you can see that at the back, but we'll pass it round later on. Okay, so, this time I'm resorting to another technique, which is to use another parting medium. Some colour on here. I'm a bit worried about this brush, but let's see what happens. I've got here, this is a kind of fat. What was originally used was a waxy fat that came from Wales, which was called spermaceti. And for very fine work, it's better, for instance, let's have a go at a leg, okay? You all saw the leg. So what I'm doing is I'm anointing one of these intaglio impressions of the leg with some of the spermaceti. And then I'm going to push into it, and I'll hold it up so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to sort of roughly make that shape out of the material. I hope I've got enough here. And I'm going to push it all the way into it. Can you see, like this? And it's probably best to use some of the dust to stop it from sticking to my fingers so I don't pull it out prematurely. And you've got to push it in very hard. So this is a sprig, like the ones that are still used, by ceramic artists. And what you then do, making sure that you fill the mould absolutely perfectly, probably was a bit mean there, his thigh is just a little bit less cellulitic than it should be, really. And then you glide the knife over it, and I've made a pretty good estimate because there's just a little bit down there that was a bit short. And the trouble is you've now got to get that out, and it probably won't drop out. So you have to tease it out with a finer knife. So I've got a modern craft scalpel here, and it's a case really of just teasing it out like that. Okay, and there it is, and drop it out. Now the technique is, if you have already made one and let it dry out, you put the dried out one back in the other in the mould. You mould the other half of it, and you put the glue on, and you stick the two together. Now the problem is that there will be little seams. But what you do is later on, when it's dried, you can fill the seam, and then they used to use the skin of dogfish. It's a shark relative. It's very, and it's like glass paper, sandpaper, and you could abrade it off. So you can use a modelling tool, to just fill the little seams, so that you can make it much more perfect. And then, if you wanted to give him some bigger pecs or make his biceps really Popeye impressive, you could augment the paste on there. Okay, so what I've done already is we have got a front and we've got a back. Okay, so what we're going to do is give him a liberal. Let's get all this stuff over here. We're going to give him. Can everyone see this? I know at the back some of you probably are a little bit. I'm going to stick some isinglass very generously on there. This is going to be very crude because I haven't got the time to do that finishing off, but it will give you a rough idea of what is possible, okay? So if we join the two together, and it is just like those kits that children used. I used to love making sort of Spitfires and, Second World War aeroplanes and things. I never thought that I'd end up doing it. The Sugar Plum Fairy. So by sticking, he looks very wooden actually, but actually, Look at that for a booty. Okay, so that sticks him together, we hope. And of course, it's very unstable. It needs like about 3 or 4 hours to dry. So this is going to be, as I say, it's with the seat of my pants that I'm doing this, right? Now, I've already made a couple of legs. Now, what's interesting about this is that there must have been about 2 or 3 other molds that went with it, because he's sitting down, which means, for those of you who know about art history, is that he's probably sitting in a chariot. So what's missing are the seahorses that drew it. The chariot itself, which was probably an oyster or a scallop or a conch shell or something. The wheels, they're all, and I've seen sets where they exist, but this is a fragmentary thing. So I haven't got his chariot, so we're going to have to sort of get him sitting on a bar stool or something, you know, because he will only work sitting down. And I know that Detroit's a great place for bar stools, because I've had some of the best beer I've ever drunk in my life here, actually, and I'm not a beer drinker. So with a little bit of, what I've done is I've stuck 2 of those legs together, and I've had to put a wire. Can you see? They use wires. Now, a few years ago, I purchased for one of the museums in England an amazing confectioner's collection, which came from the House of Savoy. You know, that family that eventually became the kings of Italy. And in the box of molds were lots of wires, which I knew were what the confectioner used to do this, you see. They didn't eat, they might have eaten that, but you wouldn't eat this, okay? So this becomes like a sort of, part of the joke, it's part of the fun, that you've got a sugar figure on the table. And of course the level of craftsmanship was probably much higher than I can master, you know. I mean, we know that because of the skill that they worked in more orthodox materials. These people were really clever. Just go around the wonderful exhibition here on tea, chocolate and coffee and look at some of the remarkable porcelain and silver. But this is an ephemeral art, and so I thought that very little had survived. But I'm going to show you this afternoon, those of you who come to my talk, that we have got some fossil evidence of this. Some stuff has survived, actually. So look, I'm going to sort of stick that leg on. It doesn't look too impressive, does it? It looks like he's sitting on a bicycle, actually. And I'm just going to have to make sure that I've got enough pace to stabilise it. So forgive me if this looks a little bit crude, but it's all I can do, you know, in the time that I've got. But it will give you a good idea. And the great thing is, you know, you can cover up all of your weaknesses and your mistakes with ornament. That's what ornament often exists for, you know. So that's going to be one leg, and I'm going to put the other one. I've got another one here, and as you can see, he's sitting down. He's not standing up, which is a pity, really, because it would have been a lot easier. And right, and then we do have a rather challenging thing, which is to clothe him. And we're going to do that from scratch. We haven't got any molds, so we'll do that and show you how to do that from scratch, because he'll be wearing a loincloth, so we've got to make him respectable. And okay, so I'm going to stick that on, if it will go on. Okay. Can you see how he's cycling a bicycle, you know? Okay, so I just leave him on his back for the moment, and I might have to stabilise him. Okay, I'm going to put his arms on last, and I've already made some which are flexed. Can you see? So I've got the fingers, because one of the most technically challenging things of all is to make a trident, which is just enough to put in a cup of tea if you have one sugar, you know. And then we've got to, you know, now the thing is, the arms are challenging because we've got to get them to hold up. So what I've done is I've made a plinth with some dolphins along the bottom. Instead of sitting him in a chariot, you know, we are going to sit him on this plinth eventually. So he's going to sit up like that, I hope. It's not a bar stool, but you know, we can get him. Now, he's coming apart at the back, so what I'm going to do, and maybe Meredith, you could be my assistant just for a moment, okay, is if you could, I'm just sticking a bit of the paste on there, if you could just pass him to me. And I'm going to just squeeze that on to just stabilise him. Do you see what I mean? I might need your help.
Yeah.
Just to hold him for a while. So let me move the taxa out of the way. That's going to be tricky. I'm going to take that off. And this should be fairly stable now, so I think I can move that without damaging it. Let's just stick it there. And I'll stick that down later on. Okay. So this is the challenging bit, because I'm going to have to work with his back to you, if you don't mind. I'm going to bring him over here, and I'm temporarily just going to stick a dollop of chewing gum for him to sit on, so he doesn't move off the plume, okay? That's so he doesn't fall off, like that. Okay. So he's silly, he looks a bit daft actually. But, okay. Now all of these seams and things can be addressed later on, but you see, we can, if he's going to be holding a trident, we can set his arms up like that. So, I mean, this is very, very low-key stuff, but what's great is we're actually using an original piece of 18th century equipment to produce a confectioner's sort of thing. So I'm going to start off with his arms, and I'm going to use a little bit to just act as I've got another arm over here which belongs on this side, and let's just see if we can articulate it in a fairly natural way, but it's quite likely to slide down a bit. But if I press it in like that, yeah, it's going to fall. So I'm going to let it just drop, okay? Because I can just, it's stuck on, but it will drop. I'll turn it the other way and stick the other one on. Okay, and it's amazing, isn't it, really? You know, it's crazy. And doing this sort of 4,000 miles from home is quite challenging. And that means that I can roll out a big sheet of it, which we can use as a loincloth and maybe a cloak or something like that, which will cover up all the seams and the joints. Now, if I was baking this as a 1 or 2 day project, I would sculpt all those little joints as possible and even increase the muscle tone and everything. So he looks a little bit like, dare I say it, Ken, is it? You know, Barbie.
Yes, Ken.
We got anyone who called Barbie here at all? I'm just distracting you while I'm rolling this material out. So I haven't got the best rolling board here, and this is a little bit thick, okay, but we need to make a pair of jockeys for him. It's going to be more like a Gandhi loincloth. So this is a little bit thick. So let's try doing it with an original rolling pin, which is made of mahogany. It's okay. And then what we'll do is we'll use the gilding knife just to sort of cut out. It's a rather thick and lumpen looking cloak, but it will be better than nothing. And it's possible to, you know, do all those wonderful folds that you get in drapery, you see. It'll just hide the seams, that's the main thing. So if we start off, if we kick off down here, we can perhaps, sorry you can't actually see this, but it's difficult for me to do it back to front. And I'm going to drape it around like this, and just a little bit more glue. As you can imagine, this isn't an easy thing to do in front of like the assembled sort of art historians of North America, you know. And then if we can just get it over that shoulder like that, and drop it down a bit. He's not wanting to stick, that's the trouble. And, okay, come on. Right, this is where it gets difficult. this is where I might need you again, Meredith. If you could just hold the top of his head, just to support him for me, so he doesn't move. Got him? Okay. And then what I'm going to do is a little bit more adhesive and a modelling tool. And if I can just get that to roll down a bit like that. I might leave his loins unclosed, actually. We'll just make him slightly respectable. You see, so with the modelling tool, you can actually start to make nice little folds in the drapery. And okay.
Still got to say.
No, he's okay now. So it's pretty crude, but you can see that, you know, if I had another hour or so, I would, you know, do that much more skillfully. I'm just going to put that there like that. And, you know, can you see we've got a very rough figure, but, you know, he's, what we could do, we could steal the dolphin off here, and we can give him a nice little partner stick down like that, which will help him stand up a bit. Okay, and then we can get one of these things and see if we can actually get that to, well, he's in the wrong place maybe for that. Let me see. Well, let me hit the ground now. I've got to do it on this hand here. So I can move that. Okay, so a few technical problems there, but there is a kind of...
I hope you enjoyed this demonstration of making these wonderful but temporary sculptures. The guests of these feasts could not only admire these beautiful objects, but could eat the plates and centerpieces at the banquets, or even take them home to eat them. Tastier than ice sculptures? Come and visit the Detroit Institute of Arts to see many wonderful things in one of America's great museums.